Hello, greetings. Welcome to Mr. Dyer's Musings. I'm Mr. Dyer. Thank you for joining me today as we discuss the second part of a two-part series I am doing on Civil War nurses. Before we get started, I'd like to always thank my wife and my loving family for their unending support. Thank you to my students for everything that they do, especially during this time. Thank you to you guys, my viewers, for checking in and watching them, making comments. I hope that you are getting something out of them. And if you are new to my channel, please check out my other videos. I've got quite a few now, mostly focusing on the American Civil War and medicine and officers. Please like, subscribe, and comment. And if you have any questions, if you have anything to share, please do. Because in the learning experience, I also like to get things back from others as well. All right, so Civil War nurses. In my last video, I broke down some of the specifics that was included in the various texts that I had, including the manual of the Civil War surgeon and of the hospital steward. And I also used some primary sources of a memoir that was kept by a female nurse. In my last video, I discussed basically the differences between female nurses and male nurses, but the emphasis was definitely on male nurses. This video is also going to be an emphasis on male nurses, and specifically, what did they do out in the field? What did they do when things hit the fan, so to speak? So as a Civil War nurse, you need to be a male, you need to be a private, and you need to be recommended and handpicked by the surgeon in charge, which means you can also be dismissed. Now, how that works in the hierarchy of things is you would get picked by the Civil War surgeon and you would be detached service from your company and regiment. Now, how would that look like if you're a reenactor, or how would that look like if you're on the scene? As a Civil War nurse, you would wear the uniform that was prescribed to you in your regiment, because you're still actually part of that regiment. It's just detached service, meaning that you are being used elsewhere. So if you're an infantry soldier, you're going to be wearing, generally speaking, either the frock coat or the sack coat of your regiment. In dress uniform, it's going to be either the frock coat or it's going to be the dressed shell jacket with all the piping and everything. So if you're a cavalryman and you're assigned to nurse duty, then you're going to wear yellow. If you're artillery, you're going to wear red. If you're infantry, you're going to wear the blue piping, etc. Okay, so that's very important to note, especially if you are a reenactor and you're trying to decide on what your kit's going to look like. Okay, so detached service. You are still attached to your regiment, and you're going to get paid by your regiment. When they muster and line up to get their pay, you're actually going to go and line up with your regiment, and you're going to be paid by the paymaster. Now, the Civil War surgeon that is responsible for you is going to make out another form for your 25 cents extra each day that you serve as a nurse. All right, so we got that out of the way. What does it look like when you're out in the field? Where are you going to camp? Are you going to sleep in a hospital? Are you going to sleep with your regiment, etc.? So the best that I can tell from the various readings that I've had from the various memoirs, the attendants tend to sleep around the hospital. That way they can be reached rather quickly in case they're needed. You know, if a wagon, an ambulance comes up and they have some wounded that needs to be removed and they need help in the hospital, the hospital steward, who you're going to report directly to, isn't going to take the time to go find you in your company streets or regimental camps. So you're going to camp with the hospital. And if it's a stagnant camp, then you're going to use probably a common tent, which is commonly used as like an A-frame. If you're on campaign, then it's probably going to be a shelter half or absolutely nothing. Even surgeons, when they were on campaign, were often left without a tent. They slept on an ambulance, underneath a wagon, underneath the stars. So it just depends on the situation that is being portrayed and the real life situation of what you're in. So if you are a reenactor and that's something that you want to present, make sure that your situation fits the scenario at hand. All right, so your detached service, you are going to camp near the hospital. What are you going to do when the tasks, so to speak? Generally speaking, it's going to be menial labor. So you're going to be excused from various duties like drilling with your regiment. You're going to be excused from picket duty. You're going to be excused from going out and cutting firewood. You're going to be excused from cutting roads, things like that. Instead, your duty is going to be surrounding the hospital. So you may have to attend an ambulance wagon to go get supplies for the hospital. You may need to pitch in firewood to warm the various hospital tents or the hospital buildings that you're being serviced. You are also going to go around and tend to the cleanliness of the hospital. So that means you're going to clean bedpans, you're going to clean linens, you might be take on the role of a laundress, okay? And one of the books I read talking about Wilder a lot in the 55th Massachusetts, which was a colored regiment, he mentions how his hospital attendants did things like that. They clean the linens. They would go out with the surgeon on various expeditions to help him as needed, including going to get supplies for the hospital from the U.S. Christian Commission or from the commissary or the depots, etc. When it's a hospital scenario and there is wounded that's involved, well, what are you going to do? I mean, you're not a surgeon, so you're not going to be there doing all the amputations. You're not a hospital steward or an assistant surgeon who's going to be necessarily handing out the instruments to the surgeon. So what's your role? You are going to be responsible for taking care of the wounded men as they come in. So that means making them as comfortable as possible. You may have to get some blankets to cover them up. You may be building some temporary shelters. You may be giving them water, writing letters, reading to them, making them just as comfortable as they possibly can. And generally speaking, even stagnant hospitals before a battle, you will have some wounded or sick that you're attending to. So there's that duty on top of it. The ambulance corpsmen have their job of bringing in the wounded from the lines, but you may need to help the ambulance corpsmen take people off of the ambulance, help organize them in specific areas. The American Civil War was the first modern war here in the United States, and I use modern loosely, where Jonathan Letterman and his triage system was put in place. And as a nurse, you would be responsible in helping out with that triage system, making sure that the wounded are grouped in appropriate areas. After some experience, you're going to be able to tell right off the bat which ones are going to be most likely going to be best serviced in the amputation tent and which ones just need to be made comfortable. As it goes, the closer to the center mass of a wound, the less likely the surgeon is going to be able to do anything for that individual. So they actually tended to be put on towards the end of things. If they're still alive, after all the amputations and after the pretty much certain cases are taken care of, they will take care of those. So you'll help the assistant surgeon and the hospital steward with moving around men and shuffling them as needed to be seen in appropriate order. There's also the situation where you may attend a dressing station or go with a surgeon to maybe tend to a civilian, because that'll happen quite often. So you may have to be the baggage boy of the surgeon who's attending them. Now, what does that mean, baggage boy, right? Well, generally speaking, each hospital was given some type of case with the medical supplies that were needed for most immediate emergencies. Consider it like an advanced triage or first aid kit. If you're an EMT, you have a bag of pretty much all your necessary bandages and most likely medicines that you need to take care of most cases, right, to get them to another hospital. So this case came in a variety of different styles, and I'll actually make a few videos talking about specific cases. But earlier on in the war, when it first started, it was pretty much the knapsack. Now there was the one knapsack that was made out of wicker, which is like a basket weaved knapsack. Then later they had a framed knapsack, which is called the hospital knapsack. And Wilder actually mentions using the hospital knapsack several times in his memoir, even up to 1865. So this kind of shows that these things were floating around even later in the war. Interesting little detail. By 1862, the knapsack kind of went out of favor and went with more of the Coolidge case or the surgeon's companion. And I actually have a reproduction of the surgeon's companion that I made. And this is it. And I'll go into detail more about what's entailed with it and what's inside of it. But as you can see, it has a pretty unique shape. It's a kidney shape. And in it, it would have bandages and medicines that a surgeon would most likely need. And then later on in the war, they came out with another bag. And I'll talk about this unique item here. This is a reproduction by a leather maker who's no longer in business, Dixie Leather Works. But it's just a rectangular case. And it actually even had less specific medicines that was carried in it than the Coolidge case. So we're seeing what's happening is it's condensing what was carried on earlier in the war with the knapsack, and it's kind of heavy and a little unwieldy, to more smaller, compact cases that were just had your very bare bones minimum items that a surgeon would need. So you are the attendant that's carrying these bags to help the surgeon service the men as they need. So inside, like I mentioned, it would have bandages. Bandages are going to be a pretty important thing to put pressure on specific areas, wrap them up, may need a splint, etc. You also have things like lint. If you haven't seen my one video about an artifact revealed, check that out because I actually had some original lint. But lint is pretty much going to be the place of the gauze pad that's inside a regular Band-Aid or bandage. It would have pre-made pills like this, which is Pilulae Cathartica Compositae, and things like Spiritus Fermenti, which is liquor. That's all it is. They had different types of liquor that would be put in there. Whiskey, brandy were the common ones, but it was considered a stimulant at the time of the American Civil War. And it also tend to have more medicines that dealt with the stomach, because most issues that guys had in the war dealt with stomach issues. So do you need to vomit or puke, or do you need it to settle down? Do you need something to help loosen your stool? Do you need something to help you tighten up your stool, etc.? So stomach issues was certainly a primary issue that most people had. And in regards to surgeries that you would need, on the front lines, a surgeon would always have their pocket kit. And that was actually my very first video. So if you want to check out the kind of instruments and what was kept on a surgeon at all times, it would be the pocket kit. But you as a nurse would help the doctor on the front lines at a dressing station, handing or distributing the medicines as it was ordered. You may help bandage the patients as needed on what you pretty much know. But that wasn't actually expected of you according to the manual. That was definitely more of a hospital steward's and surgeon's job, which I always thought was interesting. So you can see right off the bat that our modern nurses today, I mean, they definitely have way more education than what even a Civil War surgeon had at the time of the American Civil War. But their technical duties of a modern nurse are so advanced compared to their predecessors, American Civil War, who is literally just there to attend and help the surgeons with some menial stuff. That way the surgeons can focus on other things. On the front lines at the dressing station, just like at the hospital, you may be needed to help the Civil War surgeon group in the triage areas. Now, you would possibly be in charge of putting men on the ambulances to go to the field hospitals. And let's talk about that really quick, because you might be kind of confused. So you have the battle line, and at the battle line, you would have your file closers who would march behind the men, and they would make sure that everybody was doing their job, issue orders, and also make sure that we don't have any deserters. But as the line moved, the file closers may also direct some men to take wounded to the dressing station. Now, as the war went on, that was lessened, where you would just pull some soldier off the line of battle because that person on the line of battle is way too valuable, right? So you would have ambulance corpsmen who would follow close to the line. And as the line moved forward and backwards, so would the ambulances and the corpsmen. They would also move forward and backward. I don't want to go into that a whole lot because I'm going to do a separate video on that. But the ambulance corpsmen would take the men who were wounded and they would take them to a dressing station. That's going to be their first place of care. At the dressing station, that's where the first level of triage is going to go. That's where the nurses come into play, and they help group the men. And after they've been grouped, you have another set of ambulances that is going to make the trip going back and forth between the dressing station, which is fairly close to the line of battle, to the field hospital, where it's usually about a mile and a half away, just out of sight of cannon fire. It didn't always happen, though. There's a lot of memoirs out there talking about how the hospital might have been overwhelmed, and I'll actually talk about an instance of that in my hospital stewards video. But you want it far away enough away that cannon fire and rifle fire is not going to damage the hospital and interrupt the surgeries and the doctors and what's going on, but also so it's not going to get captured. Okay, so you have your nurses that's on the dressing station that's going to be doing the first level of triage, and then you have another group of nurses that's going to be at the field hospital that's doing the second level of triage, because as people go in and out, you only have so many surgeons for a regiment that's going to be able to attend to the wounded. All right, so I hope that kind of breaks it down a little bit more about what the specific role of a nurse was on the front line. If you are interested in doing some readings on what attendants would do on the front line, there's the 3rd Wisconsin. There's a book out there that talks about a Civil War nurse, and he talks a little bit about his role on the front line. I would also suggest reading about the 17th Ohio Volunteer Infantry and the American Civil War. There's a guy who did a memoir who was a steward, and he mentions a little bit about what happened on the front line and how the attendants would interact with the surgeons, etc. But it's going to be extremely different from a more stable hospital environment in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Cincinnati, or even post hospitals as closer to the lines down in Florida. Because if you've ever watched MASH, you know things happen rather quickly. You have to be able to move from place to place, and your job is going to be kind of a catch-all and do whatever it needs to do. If you have any questions, please send me a message or make a post, a comment in the video. I'd love to hear what you have to say or try to answer any questions that you may have. Civil War nursing is extremely different from modern day nursing, and I hope you've got a little bit of understanding from that from my first video and second video. I sincerely appreciate you watching this video and taking the time. I hope you liked it. If you did, please click like. I'd appreciate it. And please subscribe, because that helps my channel. It helps spread the word. It gets my channel noticed a little bit more so that more people can be interactive with this whole educational experience, which is why I do it. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Give a kiss and hug to your loved ones, and I will catch you later. Have a great day.